Good evening and welcome to this week's Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, your host, and I want to say thank you for tuning in. It's a pleasure that I don't take for granted when you invite us into your home every week, and I greatly appreciate you being here whenever you see the show, whether it's live or later on. And I also very much appreciate you sharing it with your friends because word is spreading that we have some good news in Oklahoma politics. And that's exciting to me because there's an energy that I'm feeling right now with new candidates announcing just almost seems like every day on the Democratic side of the ticket. And that's really, really wonderful. It's not too late, though, for you. Today's the 21st day of March. And if you have ever considered running for office, maybe this is your year. Because with so many people loaded onto the ballot, turnout's going to be big this year. And if you have considered running for school board or county commissioner, House or Senate seat here in Oklahoma, this could well be your time. So think about it. I hope that you will seriously consider it or recommend a friend. And you can always call the office, the ODP office, and we will gladly help walk you through the process and show you that it's not some big monster once you start to figure out the pieces. All that being said, I mentioned that there is an excitement in the air, and it's due to, in no small part, to so many people who are engaged every single day in Oklahoma politics. And my guest this evening, as we continue our appreciation for women this month of Women's History Month, is someone who never seems to tire of working for the party and for the people of Oklahoma. She is Oklahoma's DNC committee woman, and it's my privilege to welcome her to the Hamilton Report. Kalyn Free, good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me, Scott. I really look forward to this show.
I tell you something, with all the rain in the state, I'm glad we both have good internet connections tonight. I was a little bit concerned about that.
Absolutely.
So let's start by learning a little bit about you. People know your name. They see you at events. They see you doing work. But tell us what brought you into the world of Oklahoma politics in the first place.
I'm sorry you cut out there, but I think you were asking me to tell you a little bit about myself. Is that right?
Yes. And what brought you into politics in the first place?
Well, thank you, Scott, for that question. I was born and raised in southeastern Oklahoma in the heart of the Choctaw Reservation. My mom was very politically active in tribal affairs, and my grandmother and my sisters were also active in Democratic Party politics. So I kind of grew up knowing that, but that elections had consequences and knowing firsthand that it was just important. I grew up in a Democratic family. My grandmother, actually, my Choctaw grandmother was Republican, but my Irish grandmother was Democrat. So I kind of got that tug from each side. But I also grew up tell folks when I was born, State Senator, Oklahoma State Senator Gene Stipe was my state senator, and Carl Albert was my congressman. So I thought every little girl grew up, having powerhouses and having the Speaker of the United States House as their congressman. So that also tremendously influential to me.
Okay, that's what brought you. I'm struck by the similarity. Earlier this month, we had Jana Lewis Harkins on, and your story is so similar. She also grew up with parents and grandparents who were very involved in political action in the state. So I think that's a nice parallel. But why now? Why are you still doing this work? What is it that motivates you every day to get up and bleed blue?
That's a good question. Folks, unfortunately, a lot of times we see people who've held office before, who've run for office before, and if they're not successful or they're not successful in later races, they just kind of go by the wayside. And that's not me. That's obviously not my counterpart on the DNC, Governor David Walters, who serves with me on the Democratic National Committee. And what I told folks when I lost or wasn't successful in my congressional race, which is now 18 years ago when I ran for Congress in 2004, I said, you know what? I woke up the next day believing the same things that I believed my entire life. Yes, my daughter was in the dirt, that I wasn't successful in that congressional race, but I still believed that that elections matter, and that having good folks represent us, like you said at the beginning of this show, from the courthouse to, to county commissioners, all the way up to the White House, school boards, all of that stuff all of those positions are so important. And it doesn't matter that my name's not on the ballot. It doesn't matter that I'm no longer holding elective office. It's critically important. If we want to have a state and a nation that reflects our values and that lifts up the least among us and takes care of people who need help the most, then we have to be engaged in party politics. There's no other way.
And I think that that's a really good call to action, because one of the things that Alicia Andrews, our chair, does every day on her live is talking about how Democrats work to make life better for everyone. It's not a segregated group. It's not any one particular party. It's, in fact, working to make life better in Oklahoma for everyone. And I can really understand that drive for you. I got to say, though, making that happen the day after your election or after your candidacy, that's getting right back in the saddle again, I'll tell you.
Well, I will admit that I didn't actually, and that was in 2004. And so I left Oklahoma for a few weeks. I went to Minnesota and I volunteered on the Carrie Edwards campaign, probably within just a short period of time of losing that election. So, but I wasn't ready to face my fellow Oklahomans immediately, but I knew that it was important. And so I went to Minnesota and I worked on that campaign as a volunteer. And I went to every tribal reservation in Minnesota for several weeks, turning out the Native American vote there.
Talk to us a little more about, I was going to say the tribes in Oklahoma. I really guess the question is, why do you think that our current governor has been so confrontational with our tribes, just picking fight after fight?
That is inexplicable to me. It really, really is. There is no good reason whatsoever for the measures that he's taken, the steps that he's taken. He's, like I kind of liken him to, the junior high bully. He didn't get his way. And he, instead of stopping to dig, he just kept digging deeper and deeper. And most sentient beings in Oklahoma can look around and realize that the tribes are an absolute asset in this state. And I think he went into office thinking that he could balance the budget on the backs of Native American tribes. And he had this whole grandiose scheme in place that he was going to extract, the pound of flesh from the gaming compacts. And that's what he campaigned on. That's what he thought he was going to do. And he was unwilling. Once he realized that wasn't going to happen, he didn't just double down, triple down. He wasted our money, taxpayers' money, on, frivolous lawsuits, on legal expenses, continuing to fight the tribes in Oklahoma, instead of coming to the table and recognizing the tribal governments as sovereign nations and sitting down and negotiating with tribes. He is just he continues to battle the Indian tribes, and I cannot even begin to explain why he does what he does. He certainly has other opportunities to with oil and gas industry and other interests in Oklahoma that he could make them pay their fair share of taxes, but he certainly doesn't want to do that.
And it's really a shame, because when I look at the work that our tribes do in the state, taking care of people and the number of people employed is amazing to me. The number of people that work in hospitality, in the gaming industry, and these are well-paying jobs. They're keeping people in Oklahoma, and so I agree with you. There's no explanation that I can find for his behavior.
And I appreciate what you're saying about, the tribal governments employing non-Indians, and that is absolutely true. But look, one thing that I think is so rewarding and so refreshing is when we look at, the worldwide pandemic that we've been in, and the fact that tribal governments, you can go to any health clinic in Oklahoma, and it doesn't matter whether you're a tribal citizen or not, you can get a COVID vaccine. And that's not the case. I mean, I have friends, in Oklahoma City. I was talking to a friend of mine a few months ago, and he couldn't get a vaccine in Oklahoma City. And I said, come to the Cherokee Reservation, go anywhere in the Cherokee Reservation, and you can walk in and they'll stick a needle in your arm. And that's because it's, the tribal governments realize that we're all in this together. And a healthy Oklahoma, healthy Oklahomans make for healthy tribes. And we're all intermarried. We all work together. We all live together. And it's not us versus them. We see it that way. I know tribal leaders see it that way. I just wish Governor Stitt saw it that way.
You raise a very interesting point, Kalyn. You said that, that we have to work together. This nation, after the last failed president, has become so divided on so many things, so many areas. And it's almost as if the Republicans in Oklahoma, I'm speaking specifically about our state, it's as if they have just made it their absolute business to keep dividing. And that's not going to move us into a top 10 anything slot.
You're absolutely correct on that. And we see, our state going backwards, and it's going backwards in so many ways, whether it's, banning of books or, there's so many things happening at the Capitol, and we see it in the other parties' primaries. I mean,
Yes.
I was talking to a political activist just a couple hours ago, and about the U.S. Senate race in particular, not on our side, but on the Republican side. I mean, what is going to happen? Who is going to be the nominee for the Republican Party? And that is, it's frightening, because when you look at some of the candidates that are running and the platforms that they're running on, and not just for the United States Senate, but for CD2, my home district, Congressional District 2, you've got the chair of the Republican Party, running for that seat. And we know the divisiveness and the hate and the rhetoric that he has spewed as a legislator and as the state party chair. And, it's the party of Lincoln is not the party of inclusivity. It is the party that is, it's as if they're trying to intentionally find race bait and hate bait on the most gross issues that they possibly can. And it's no longer just, running to the right. We used to say, well, Republicans run to the right to see who's going to win the nomination. But the issues that they're championing are, it's not physical conservatism. It is hurtful. It costs people's lives, and it makes our state an unhealthy state and a not safe state for folks who are not necessarily like them. And it is nothing, it is in my opinion, it is the opposite of Christianity. It's certainly not the what would Jesus do, Jesus that I was raised to believe in when I was a young child.
And that's, that here we are again in the middle of the election cycle, and we're hearing God, guns, and gays again. In this case, I'm talking specifically about trans Oklahomans, but it's the same boogie monster treatment. And the level of racism, the level of it goes way beyond indifference to women, the absolute disregard for women in our legislature. That has to stop. We cannot advance as a state, as cities. We're not going to keep good talent here. And so that's why I think it's so encouraging for me to see so many, particularly new candidates who are running for office this year.
Right.
People who are raising their hand and saying, you know what, I've never done this before, and I'm scared, but I want to be a part of making it better. So I do see a good sense of hopefulness in our state. And I'm not talking just about Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I'm talking about more rural communities where people are coming together saying, we got to stop. We've just got to take a breath and figure out how to turn this thing around. And that's gratifying to me.
And, I firmly believe that if we had more women in all elected bodies, like you said earlier, you were encouraging folks we've got filing period coming up. You were encouraging people at the beginning of the show to look at various offices and run. And it's important to have good candidates running, obviously from school board to the state capitol. But it's also important that we have a diverse body politic, and that the candidates that are running are, people of color, LGBTQ, transgender, those issues, people of all faiths, and women. I mean, women hold up half the sky. And we know that when women are at the table, whether it's in the boardroom, the courtroom, the lunchroom, the schoolroom, or the state capitol, discussions are different, and our opinions and attitudes and influences, we influence conversation. And I've seen that happen over and over again. So I am thrilled that we've got, some women that have announced that have never run for office again. And, hopefully they're all successful. More than likely they all won't be, but it's a stepping stone, and we've got to start. And I look forward to supporting the women that are running, and obviously Democrats, but especially supporting women running for office this election cycle.
As you were speaking, I couldn't help but think of something I heard this weekend, and I knew it intellectually, I guess, but it had not really sunk in. That in the Supreme Court hearing process and ultimately voting process by the Senate, not one woman of color will be allowed to vote for her because there's not one woman of color in the United States Senate.
Mm-hmm.
That's a powerful statement right there.
Right.
And so to your point of increasing our inclusivity in all ways, and that's one of the things that personally I'm proud of with the party. It's one thing to say we're the big tent party, but it's another to live that out. When you can take ideas that are different one from the other and hammer them together in such a way that it positively impacts people's lives. There are definitely some challenges with that because you've got conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats, liberal Democrats, ultra liberal Democrats. So it's a wide spectrum of folks. But in the end, I think we're all working toward the same thing. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Kalyn, in the time that you've been involved with the state party, what are some of the changes that you've seen that you're happy about, or some changes that you hope to see in the near future?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I'm very, very pleased about, and that is the fact that we have an African-American woman as our state party chair. I think that Alicia is doing an absolute bang-up job, and the fact that she is African-American is just cream, is just icing on the top. The fact that it took us this long to elect a Black woman is not something that we should be proud of, obviously. But Alicia has, and I think that you and the staff at ODP and the officers have really turned our party around. As we know, the Democratic Party the state party has been in debt for a long, long time, and we haven't necessarily had, and we're no longer in debt, and that's a big plus. But we have a strategic plan going forward, and that's at all levels. And so I tell my friends across the country, you think it's easy to be a Democrat in the state of Oklahoma? I have friends in Oregon who are involved in party politics. I'm like, you guys have it made, and so this is truly a labor of love for all of us, all of the officers from the precinct level all the way up to the chair of the state party. And I think that we are now more cohesive. Not that we don't have, our disagreements, obviously, but actually this afternoon I had a call with Alicia, and she was, downloading because I wasn't able to go to the DNC meeting last week, and she was telling me some ideas that she had about our state convention, which isn't until next year. But she's always forward thinking, and she's always has a plan to improve our party, and she doesn't ever seem to, as I say, get her dauber in the dirt. So I have, and I've been involved for over 20 years here, because I was in DC for about 10 years after I got out of law school. But I've been very active in party politics for over 20 years, and we've had some really good state party chairs. That's not a knock on them, but elections have evolved, campaigns have evolved. The campaigns that we run today are light years different than they were 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago. And the fact that our party and our leadership embraces technology, embraces change, and is always looking to figure out ways to connect with voters. And it hasn't been a bed of roses, obviously, because she came into office, and then a pandemic hit us. And so we all have struggled as to how to stay connected and to keep the party moving forward in the most dire of circumstances.
And I love hearing that, because, sometimes we do get busy doing the work and we don't stop long enough to really reflect on what it is we're doing. So I appreciate that. I want to take us back, if I may, to Indian women and the folks who have just, I learn more and more about women, Native women, and so many inspiring, empowering stories. But what have they helped, specifically women here? What have they helped to make change in Oklahoma and in the United States?
Well, just as a point of personal privilege, if I that you've got right behind me is Wilma Mankiller, and I've got all these. There's Ruth Bader Ginsburg on this wall. I have all of these, powerful women behind me. There's Michelle Obama, Roosevelt, all these folks that helped shape the world. And the fact that Chief Mankiller is going to be featured by the United States Mint on a coin is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's a huge deal, and she was so influential in Oklahoma and internationally. And her legacy lives on in so many people in the work that continues today. But this is Women's History Month, and I appreciate the question you asked. Some things one thing that most folks, a lot of people don't know, because they don't know American history, and they don't realize that the United States government was modeled after the Iroquois Confederacy, and then going, the founding fathers looked at that, and we had, folks don't realize that tribal governments were functioning in this country, pre-European contact. And so that's one issue. But another issue, and for your listeners out there, I would really encourage them to look at the works of Sally Roche Wagner. And I actually was able to meet Sally right before the pandemic hit a couple of years ago. She was in Tulsa speaking at Gilcrease, and she's written several books on women's suffrage. And she is the only person out there that is really encapsulating and did the research on the Native American women's influence on the women's suffrage movement. And when you go back and you look at Katie Stanton and Gage and all these folks who were involved, they went to and they realized when they looked at the Iroquois Confederacy and the Six Nations that the women there controlled their own property, they controlled their own belongings. The political power was shared equally among everyone in the nation, with decisions, being a consensus and in pure democracy. And it really influenced those women's actions when they were trying to get the right to vote. And Native American women were like, wait a minute, we've got it better under our form of government, under our culture than we would have it under the white man's law. So that's, and folks don't realize that. And one of the unfortunate things that happened as a result of assimilation is, women, most tribes were matrilineal. My tribe, the Choctaw Nation, the Cherokee Nation, where I work, matrilineal society. And through, the missionary contact with the tribes, we lost a lot of that. And, my tribe right now, the Choctaw Nation, we only have one woman serving on the tribal council. But if you go back to our history, it was the women who influenced the decisions of the tribe. And I think that, and that kind of springs us forward to where we are today. And what I was saying earlier about why it's so important to have women at the table. And, we look at what's going on in Ukraine, and you think about, women sending their own children to war. And we just know that the world would be a lot different if we had not just 50% of the power in elected offices, but a critical mass of women in power.
There's no question. And as you were speaking, I thought it was really interesting that you said that Native women owned property. They took care of, their families, their homesteads. And in my lifetime and yours, not long ago, you couldn't even get a checking account
right
in your own name by yourself. No mortgage, credit cards. And that's not ancient history. That's very recent history. So there's a lot we can learn from those who have gone before us. And I'm going to ask Angela if you would put up that website one more time, because I'm interested in reading some of her work, and I hope that our viewers will be as well. And we'll post this as well in the comments for anyone who wants to see it later on. Kalyn, we are just about out of time. Before we go, is there any parting word that you would like to leave us with, a sense of hopefulness for this fall?
It's a dynamic time in Oklahoma. Obviously, you mentioned this at the very beginning of your show. We're going to have 2 United States senators' offices on the ballot. We've got a governor's race on the ballot. We've got all 5 congressional races up and down the ticket. We don't know what's going to happen in the state of Oklahoma. And I think it's an exciting time. I'm not going to say we're going to sweep these races, but we're going to have some big coattails to ride on. And I think that's going to help our down ballot candidates. And I learned, like I said, at the feet of some of the masters when I was growing up, and having competitive races at the county commissioner level, that drives turnout. Having those races at the local level drives turnout, and that is going to help the top of our ticket as well. So we've got coattails that we're climbing up on, and we've got coattails that we're riding on. And so I think it's exciting, and I look forward to working with our candidates and throughout the election cycle and on into November.
Before we go, I just want to say your husband, Steve, has been going through some pretty major medical issues. I'm delighted that things are moving so well for him, and that he was able to free you for a little time with us this evening. And it wouldn't be a visit with Kalyn without looking at your puppy dogs.
Oh,
these, oh my gosh. And for our viewers, Kalyn single-handedly pulled off our dog calendar for this year. Great success. We sold out, and hopefully we'll be doing that again this year for next year. We're just going to get an earlier start this year.
Right, absolutely.
Kalyn, thanks so much for being with us. I'll look forward to talking to you real soon.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Well, friends, that is our time for this evening. I'm so grateful that you tuned in, that you spent some time with us this evening. I hope that you will tune in daily at 4:15 on Facebook and YouTube when Alicia Andrews brings us daily news that we can use to make a difference, the way that we can advocate for ourselves and our families. So do that, and please take good care of yourself this week. It's officially spring, and we've got the rain to show for that today. But take good care of yourself, and I will look forward to seeing you back here again next Monday evening at 6:30. Have a great evening.